face for ourselves with technology troubles. Silver lining.
It looks like we are back on live. So we are going to continue with our introductions. Thank you guys for your patience. So now we're going to pass it on to Claire for her introduction.
Hi, my name is Claire Nelson. I am a senior at Farmington High School representing Congressional District 2, and I use she, her pronouns.
Next is Weston.
Hi, I'm Wes Knopf Miller. I am from Congressional District 1. I go to Fairmont High School, and I use he, him pronouns.
Next is Audrey.
Hi, I'm Audrey. I'm a sophomore at Central High School in St. Paul, representing Congressional District 4, and I use he, him pronouns.
Next is Haley.
Hey everyone, my name is Haley. I am also a District 4 representative. I go to school in North St. Paul, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Next is Liv.
Hi, I'm Liv. My pronouns are she, her. I go to school at Hopkins High School, and I represent Congressional District 5.
And last but not least, Joaria.
Hey everyone, my name is Joaria. I also represent Congressional District 5. I go to Spring Lake Park High School and I use she, her pronouns.
Awesome. Thank you all for your introductions. I will now want to introduce one of our panelists, starting with Heather Mueller, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Education.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Mueller, and like Kusa said, I'm the Deputy Commissioner with the Minnesota Department of Education, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Thank you, Heather. Next is Shore Salkis with the Department of Health.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shore, like the North Shore, the seashore, and my pronouns are they, them, their, or my name. And I am with the Minnesota Department of Health. During non-COVID times, I do a lot of community engagement and health equity work. And during COVID times, I do community engagement and health equity work, more specifically in the COVID response, doing LGBTQ community response and engagement at lots of different intersections. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Shore. So now we will begin our event today with a quick discussion just surrounding youth and COVID-19. So we're going to have some of our Minnesota Youth Council representatives talk about their experiences during this pandemic. We're fortunate to be able to have students from all over the state so they can share their unique perspectives and ideas. And so we will start with Weston from Congressional District 1. You could go when you're ready.
Hi. So I'm Weston from Congressional District 1. I go to Fairmont High School, like I said. And so my e-learning experience has been quite interesting. I go to a fairly rural school. It's a county of about 20,000 people, and it's the county seat, Fairmont. So a lot of when it comes to e-learning is dealing with the tech issues and making sure that students have access to internet, but also access to the hardware they need. And it's been an interesting challenge, but not insurmountable. Our district originally had a plan where they sent out Chromebooks to every student need them because we're a mostly Chromebook-based school. And students have had some tech issues, but district and teachers have done a good job addressing them, making sure that students have Wi-Fi, and then other Chromebooks, like I said. When it comes to e-learning, seniors especially are quite devastated about what they're missing out on. But a lot of the district's been working pretty hard to make sure that they come up with the best solution they could for graduation and senior prom. And what they've done is they allow seniors to come in one by one, get their diploma, take a picture up on the stage, and then they can leave while still being socially distant, which obviously isn't the best situation, but given the circumstances, it's certainly better than nothing. And then when it comes to actual distance learning, online school can be a hit or miss for a lot of people. A lot of my friends have been really excelling and getting schoolwork done a lot earlier. Instead of having a 7-hour school day and then homework on top, they can get their work done in 1 to 2 hours. But others are really struggling to turn in assignments and just having the motivation and are on the verge of failing classes. And it's not even motivation a lot of times. A lot of times they just can't work without that school setting because they don't have that in-person instruction, or they just don't have that space to do work. Mental health when it comes to online learning is really affecting people, just because the social distancing means that you're really confined to your family and not as many people as you would see on a daily basis. And so while resources are available, I don't know if I don't think a lot of people in my community know that they're available. Students also are really concerned about their future and what they'll do. Not much is being communicated regarding what colleges are planning on doing, because that's on a case-by-case basis. What juniors should be doing for college applications, whether it be standardized tests like the ACT or the SAT. And then with the AP tests going on right now, they certainly are working less than perfect for plenty of students, having submission errors, having to retake them in June. So distance learning has overall been tough for a lot, but the problems are being seen and being addressed. But the main thing about the pandemic is that while a lot of the issues that I talked about just now were specific to just distance learning, students are feeling the effects of the larger world in their own life. And this is with parents losing jobs. Students are feeling firsthand of having the economy damaged due to them. Students are seeing their friends and their family have cases and have serious medical problems due to the virus. And so when it comes to the pandemic, we need to ensure that students and young people are in the conversation about the solutions, and their experiences are being addressed, being talked about in the larger context of the crisis, and are being supported.
Thank you, Weston. We will now go to Claire next.
Hi, so I have a pretty unique distance learning experience. So I go to Farmington High School, and that's a very technology-based, student-driven school. So even before distance learning, our school was almost entirely reliant on iPads, and we often had hybrid classes. And if you're not familiar with those, they're just classes where teachers will assign students work to complete during the class period, but just allow them to do it like outside of the classroom on their own time. So we just have like a lot of freedom in my school. Like they always say they treat us more like college students than they do like high school students. So the transition was like, it was hard for every school to make, but it was probably a lot less hard for my school. I remember when Governor Walz first made the address saying that schools in Minnesota were going to close, he said there was like a 1 week like planning period for teachers. My school was ready to start literally like the next day, just because we have those systems in place. So my school has been doing pretty good in that respect. Just speaking from my own personal experiences, I've been studying for AP exams and starting to do some of those. And one thing that I've really appreciated from my teachers is that before distance learning, they would do a lot of like supplemental in-class work to kind of like help our learning, but I always found it like debatable if those things actually ever really helped us learn that much. But now it's a lot more content based, like they're just giving us stuff that is helping us for the exam, and I've just appreciated that so much. And just kind of going off of what Weston said with the AP exam struggles, I actually experienced some of that because I just had I had my first 2 AP exams on Monday and Tuesday. And on my first one, I had a submission error. So I'm going to have to retake my exam, which is kind of disappointing. And I'm sure that is pretty prevalent. I know that is very, very prevalent in all students around the country right now. So personally, in my school, I think a lot of students are actually liking distance learning. Like me, I'm a senior, so there's a lot of like sadness surrounding that, the things we're going to be missing out on. But my school is trying to make up those memories for us. Like they're having a grand march like a drive through of our high school basically for a grand march, but that actually isn't too well received among the senior class, so I don't think it's going to be that popular. But personally, this has honestly just made me feel a lot more comfortable going to college, because now I know, like, oh, I'm capable of like being happy without my senior class, and it's just made me feel a lot more comfortable to like transition into that new community next year. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Next, we will hear from Joaria.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I share some of the same experiences as Claire. My school's always been technology based ever since we started. So we already had our iPads and everything set. So the transition technologically wasn't that difficult, but I think it was a lot more difficult with keeping up with our classes, because the atmosphere and the environment changed completely. Where a lot of our teachers, like we have in-person like live sessions, but they're only once a week, and a lot of our assignments are meant for us to do on our own. So the support has definitely gone down. And for me, especially classes like math, where you have to learn it by yourself, it's a lot harder than doing it in person. So that's been like a huge struggle. And I think mental health wise has also been another huge thing. Like our school struggled a lot with dealing with mental health, and especially during the pandemic, they haven't been able to like provide a lot of resources to students that need mental health support. So definitely just seeing the ends of like students just not getting the support that they need and just feeling kind of alone during this time. So yeah, my experience, I think it's a lot similar to Weston and Claire, but since I live in an urban area, it's a lot more different with like my neighborhood community. My neighborhood, especially, they're trying to do we've been helping getting food to different families, and we had like things like Zoom meetings with a bunch of kids around our city. So that's been something that we're trying to do to make sure the community stays involved, but definitely the school setting has been hard to deal with and stay engaged.
Awesome. Thank you, Joaria. So now we are going to transition into the Q&A portion of our panel. And so what we're going to do is I will hand it off to Haley with the first question.
Awesome. Okay, so reminder, my name is Haley. I use she, her pronouns and represent District 4. So the first question is around like media and a lot of the misinformation that's been spreading around. So where can students and families across Minnesota find credible information, or even like news sources, to avoid misinformation around COVID-19 and ensure that they're credible?
Thank you, Haley, so much. I'm going to jump in and answer a little bit, and then I'd love to turn it over to you, Shore, if there's anything else you want to add from the Department of Health. The governor has a COVID resources page, so it's mn.gov/governor/COVID-19. And there's a variety of links and resources, including a specific mental health page on there. It also links directly to the Minnesota Department of Health COVID-19 webpage, which we can share that out, but it's health.state.us/diseases/coronavirus. And there's up-to-date information on there, as well as the CDC's website. And I would say those are the most reputable places. I think one of the things that we've learned really specifically in our response around education and childcare is some of the information is truly changing. What we know about this virus is changing regularly. And so it is really important. It's a great question to think about ensuring that we've got the most accurate information. Also wanted to highlight that recent news about COVID-19 and research that's happening. You can check out the University of Minnesota's Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, and they've got a great website too. Sure, is there anything you want to add from the Department of Health?
Sure. I think those are all really good, really great resources, and certainly the ones that we kind of like pull out of our handbag and offer to people quite regularly. The other resource that I'll mention briefly is that the Minnesota Department of Health has a public hotline, and I will look up the number and post it in the chat. I don't remember it from memory, which I should, because I staff the public hotline. And what it is it's a space for anybody to call with their questions. And so in staffing, I get all sorts of different questions like I can't even, the breadth of the questions is incredible. So people call and want to talk through like, I'm not feeling well, or my family member's not feeling well, what should we do? To, I heard this thing come up in the governor's briefing today. What does this mean? So, I mean, people are calling with so many questions. And if you have questions, please do feel free to call the public hotline. One of our most important tasks when we staff that hotline is to know how to connect people based on what their questions are. So there's other hotlines that are specifically about school settings, workplace settings, all sorts of different ways to connect people to get their questions answered. So that's a great resource too.
And Haley, I just say one more, I just posted the hotlines on there for sure, so I saved you a step.
Thanks.
One more thing I would just mention is my amazing colleague Brenda's on the line, and she has helped set this up. So thanks, Brenda. But we have an email address, childrenscabinet.mmb@state.mn.us. So folks felt like, I don't want to call the hotline, or I'm nervous to, feel like maybe the information isn't exactly what I'm looking for. We're happy to play quarterback and try to figure out how to get you the right answer if you want to email us directly there. And Hoofson knows how to get us too, via text, email, or any form of communication. So thank you for the question, Haley.
Hi, my name is Audrey again, he, him from CD4. And my question sort of goes around what we've already talked about when it comes to distance learning. So how is Minnesota working towards ensuring a quality distance learning experience for all students?
Well, thank you very much for asking that question. Again, my name is Heather Mueller, and I'm Deputy Commissioner with the Minnesota Department of Education. And I think it's important to note is that first and foremost, as educators, the whole reason that we went into the teaching profession is because we really wanted to work with students, and we really wanted to be with you, in front of you, and beside you, and sometimes behind you, pushing you, right, to continue to do your best and to really bring out that and foster that learning perspective and mentality. And so moving to a distance learning model, it was not ever really something that as educators we thought was going to be the way that we were going to move. And I think that probably as students, you didn't think we were going to move that way either. And so we are really looking at how it is that we can redefine and support our districts and our charter schools in equitable practice, and really try to increase our staff, our students, and our family knowledge about what a distance learning model looks like. While some of you have talked about the fact that you are more comfortable and confident in a distance learning model because you've been in a one-to-one, or because your school has really modeled itself around that type of learning and programs, we have other districts that have not. And there's no right nor wrong. It just really is the way that you've decided to approach education in your particular city and county and schools. And so we are really striving to ensure that what we are not doing by distance learning is that we're not inhibiting students, that we're really making sure that you have the access that you need to the devices, you have the access that you need to the internet, that is not based on your demographic, and it is not based on your geographic. And we recognize that sometimes in the state of Minnesota, regardless, because of where you live, and because of your racial and economic background, those are indicators of what type you have access to. And so our goal is to ensure that we can continue to provide a high quality education that Minnesota is known for, but really ensure that you have the access and equity that you need to be able to do what you need to do to learn. And that is the whole premise behind the work that we're trying to do. And so that's some of the work we're partnering with the governor's team, the children's cabinet, to really think about how is it that we can not only build those equitable plans and think about how it is that we can do distance learning, but also ensure that you have the access and equity that you need to be able to achieve the high quality education that you're used to.
Hi, I'm Liv.
Hi.
From Congressional District 5. What are some ways that school will look different for students once, or even if, we return in the fall?
Yeah, I appreciate your question. Thank you very much. And I wish that we had an answer to that. I think that if we could answer that question, we would save not only our state, but our nation and probably our world with a lot of a lot of worry. We just came out yesterday with looking at how it is we can do summer school and look at summer programming a little bit differently. We are going to try to take a baby step as the governor talks about turning that dial. We're turning the dial just a little bit to see how it is that we would be able to have like a hybrid model where if you have summer school or summer learning that you're going to be doing, half of the students are in the building and half are out, and then you rotate that schedule. To do some of those, to have some of those options to really begin that. But that's also saying that it's 1 adult to 9 students, because that keeps it in that 10-person ratio. And so really what we're talking about is thinking, how is it that we can set up a system and structure and think of the scenarios about what our education system could look like, regardless of where we are within this pandemic. We would always like to be able to be back in schools and having our students with us and our teachers, again, in front of us, beside us and behind us, really supporting us. But if that's not a possibility, then is there a model where we can have at least access to our students and you have access to your teachers in person every once in a while? And we want to do the very best job we can at that. And if that's not going to be working, then how do we ensure that a distance learning model continues to be equitable for all of our students and high levels of learning is happening? So really what we're not thinking about is really what fall specifically is going to look like. We're really creating the scenarios around what we think the learning environments could be. But I think that the most important thing that we want to also communicate is it's not just about what you're learning. It's one of the very first times that we're really talking about the fact that the health decisions and the safety and wellness of not only our students, but also your families and our communities takes the very front seat to what we're thinking about for education. And that's going to really drive our decisions about how it is we move forward with the fall. I wish that we could give a more concrete answer on what that's going to look like. But I think that what we know is we are really creating scenarios to hopefully get us to an answer. But thank you for that question.
I'd just love to add on to that too. I think MDE and Heather, she's being a little modest. I think the agency did a lot of engagement with young people. We did on the Children's Cabinet too. One of the things we heard is this desire to be with your peers, be with students. I've had a number of high school students say to me, like, I really miss my teacher. And I think that MDE has gone, what the governor did yesterday in that executive order is really sort of is incredibly innovative and is not necessarily what we're seeing in other states. Is to like directly respond to what we heard from young people on that and try to create an environment that is first and foremost safe, and second answers that call that we heard and the desire to come back together and to have that option for that hybrid model in that way. And I know that it's come up in a couple other conversations with states, and they had said, we hadn't even thought about that. That's awesome that that you all are thinking about that in Minnesota. So just want to highlight really to Heather's point about how new all of this is and the innovation that's happening.
Awesome. So yeah, students have a lot of shared experiences about the lack of protection for employees that have to work during this pandemic, especially considering that a lot of students are employed in like fast food or restaurants where they're in contact with like a lot of different people on an everyday basis. And so how do we leverage and push companies to acquire personal protective equipment for all employees?
Thank you for the question. So when the governor signed executive order this week to reopen some businesses at a limited capacity and to specifically kind of turn those famous dials a little bit, non-critical sector exempt businesses are required to establish and implement a COVID-19 preparedness plan, and that plan included implementation of occupational safety and health standards and MDH and CDC guidelines in workplaces. That included addressing social distancing, worker hygiene, cleaning and disinfection protocols. The plan is required to be provided to all workers, and workers must be trained on the plan so that they understand and adhere to the precautions to prevent transmission. Part of the plan also required employers to provide recommended protective supplies, such as non-medical cloth masks, gloves, disinfectant guards, shields, etc. I'd also say the Department of Labor and Industry is a resource. If workers don't feel safe, they should report that. And if they feel like they're not being provided the necessary equipment, I think there's been specific guidance issued by DOI around certain industries like meatpacking and manufacturing that can be a helpful guidance, but there are also a number of resources, and the governor also signed an executive order with really strong worker protections. And so we can share that information and resources in the chat, and hopefully folks could share that out as well. I think it's a great question, and frankly, I'd love if young people want to share their particular experience that they're having in the workplace more. I think we'd love to. I haven't heard about it directly from young people as workers. I think it's really candidly difficult to hear that folks are facing that, and would love to learn more in how we work together to address some of those concerns.
So looking at something we've also already talked about when it comes to students and their thoughts about colleges. So many students are concerned about going to a four-year college due to the economic impact of the pandemic. What should students know about their future college plans?
Thank you very much for that question. I really appreciate it. I know that that this has really been one of those times where we're not, one, it's unprecedented, and two, none of the adults who are working with you or supporting you, whether that's in school or at home, have ever been in a scenario like this. And so it's very difficult for us to even think about how it is that we can give you advice. So as we've thought a little bit about what it is we would make recommendations to our students about, it's really just thinking about that. One, you can still take that step and that foray into your four-year institution, your two-year institution, if you're moving into the workplace, and really be thoughtful about, like, how is it that you want to do your work, and what does that look like for you next? We've heard that some students are thinking about doing a gap year, and we have heard that other students are really being thoughtful about this as an opportunity to look at school differently, because colleges and universities are looking at different ways to enroll students, waiving things like application fees, giving students more time to commit, eliminating the ACT and the SAT admission requirement because those were not able to be given in the same way this year. It's also just thinking about how it is that you want to approach what you're going to do next. And what we know is that at no point in time have we ever wanted your K through 12 experience to limit or inhibit what you're going to do with your life next. And I don't think that this moment should change that either. It's just, how is it? It's the mindset I think that we need to be thinking about. And our colleges and universities, and we can speak with our Office of Higher Ed, and I feel like I can speak on behalf of them as well, is that we don't want this to be the reason that you don't get to have the future you thought you were going to have. This is an opportunity for us to really think about as a system and as a structure in not only in our state, but also nationally, about how it is we are going to support you as students as you begin to move through what you've seen for your future and how you want to do this work.
How are we addressing the disparities between Minnesota's white students and students of color? How are we supporting schools and districts that are already struggling to meet the needs of their students?
Thank you. I always have to make sure I'm unmuted because I'm notorious for talking and having no one hear me. So I always have to take a minute to make sure. So thank you very much for that question. It's actually an incredibly important question, because what we recognize is that while we have an incredible educational system in the state of Minnesota, we also have some of the largest gaps in the nation, and that is unacceptable, period. And so not only did we have that when we have had the best of times in education, but we are finding that we are exacerbating those issues in a time of a pandemic. And we have the responsibility to promote equitable work. And so we started that planning from the very beginning. The distance learning model is really thinking about the very first thing during those 2-week times. I think you all alluded to that. During those 2 weeks, or 8 days actually, where we said, take a time as a school district and think about what you're going to do to support your students in a distance learning model. The very first thing we identified is think about access and think about equity. Think about your students who have IEPs or 504 plans. Think about your students who are experiencing housing instability or who are homeless. Think about our multilingual learners. Think about our students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and think about how it is that we are going to support every single student based on their individual needs. not only take what you've done in a classroom setting, but how are we going to amplify that work and really build that out in your distance learning plans? And then really think about how is it that you can consider that we are going to have students who are working at home doing this learning, who have families who are continuing to work and are not going to be able to support you in that work. And we have families who are at home who do not have the language, who are necessarily going to be able to use that academic language. And how are we going to be able to ensure that we are building that capacity in our educators and in our students to be able to maintain this? And so during that planning period, we really worked with districts and identified their racial equity directors, and they helped us develop an equity lens and a reflection tool that we published to really give school districts the opportunity to reflect on their plan and then build that a little bit deeper. And then that's been used by educators across the state, and that we've also regularly been building on our resources for schools and districts, because we know that we've been struggling to meet the needs of all students, not only while we're in a distance learning model, but before we entered into this distance learning model. And so we also know that we have schools that have struggled to meet the needs of students. So we have helped build webinars. And again, I think that this is the time where we are also working with our educators, because they've never done education in this type of model. And so we built out webinars. My dog is sad. Do you hear her? Sorry. My son had Doritos, and so now she's sad. Is that we've recognized that we need to figure out how it is that we are going to build a system and structure so that our staff also gets the professional development that they need to build equitable models in a distance learning program, because we've never had to do it this way before. And while this is a really difficult time, not only nationwide, worldwide, and statewide, it is also an opportunity for us to get better and recognize that where we have shined a light on our access and equity issues, we can continue to build our muscle and around being able to support our students differently. And our goal isn't, quite frankly, to go back to normal. When our school settings resume, our goal isn't to go back to normal. Our goal is to go back to better. Our lieutenant governor talks about it that way. Our governor talks about it that way, and so does our commissioner. And that's what we're really striving toward.
Great. So a lot of people have lost their jobs because of this issue and because of the pandemic. So how is Minnesota addressing the changes to family income security due to parents and guardians being laid off?
Thanks so much for the question, Haley. And I just want to say, it's hard to answer some of these questions without feeling a little emotional. I think all of us have loved ones, friends, and family, colleagues who are experiencing this. And I think I've heard our health commissioner say a few times that economic implications of COVID have tremendous public health effects as well. And how we think about that, especially being grounded in equity and thinking about families and individuals of color and indigenous communities and low-income communities. It's something that we are thinking about and working actively on a variety of angles across state government, and the Children's Cabinet has been involved in connecting with pieces of it related to young people and families as well. So if an individual is laid off, furloughed, or has had their hours reduced, they are entitled to unemployment benefits. They can apply at uimn.org. I would say Minnesota has kind of prided itself on being one of the kind of fastest processors of those UI. I think Commissioner Grove has really done an incredible job of leading that team over there. Between March 27th and July 31st, for weeks in which folks are unemployed and eligible for benefits, they can receive an additional $600 in federal pandemic unemployment compensation. And that was federal legislation that happened. So many of you may have heard about that. For individuals that are not typically covered by regular UI, so unemployment insurance is typically something that a business pays into, but there was federal legislation that allowed those that are self-employed or independent contractors who typically wouldn't have been eligible to become eligible. There's not a separate application, and so they would still apply at uimn.org. I would say there are still gaps and holes where that program, some of us at the Children's Cabinet have been really working closely with childcare providers, for instance, and there are issues with family child care providers who are working many more hours, but have much reduced income because of fewer families being served. And the UI program in Minnesota and statute is really limited in hours. You have to be working less than 32 hours. So we've really been examining that and trying to think about how does this program work for everyone. And I think you all, I'd love to talk kind of maybe more specifically about youth proposal and work that the Youth Council has done around some other holes in the program related to youth and student workers. I'd also just mention that state agencies, especially our Department of Human Services, have set up flexibilities in their programs that support families financially and accessing basic needs. So for example, Department of Human Services has implemented a federal waiver for emergency SNAP allotments. So that's the supplemental nutrition program, and that those allotments would temporarily increase benefits available to pay for food. There's also been work between the agency and the Department of Education around benefits for families as to cover children when they're out of school and what have typically been covered. And I think Heather, I didn't see a question on this, but Heather could talk about the incredible work that that MDE has done around covering. That's my cat now. She's trying to challenge Heather on her dog. Work on trying to ensure that that families continue to have access to food. But there are a lot of examples about how our state is addressing that. I think I'd also just be remiss to not say there are incredible private sector partners that are doing this work. I think food shelves and food banks have stepped up in some incredible ways, and they are struggling with increased need and decreased funding. But I think folks are working together in really innovative ways and want to recognize their partnership. And I know nonprofits are working on helping wraparound supports. I'd also say one of the pieces that the governor worked on in the emergency powers was preventing evictions during the peacetime emergency. And so that's another big piece. So I would say there are lots and lots of examples. I won't bore you with continuing to go on, but I do think those are kind of some of the big pieces that that we're using to approach this. And like I said, it's certainly personal for me, and I think it's probably personal for many of you, seeing loved ones struggle in new ways as a result of the economic crisis of COVID.
So another thing that's on a lot of students' minds, especially during the time of a pandemic where mental health is something that is straining for a lot of students, is how can students find the resources to support their mental health during this time, and not just telehealth counseling, but other virtual online resources that are affordable and also free for students.
Hi everybody, so this is Shore again from MDH, and I think that's a really important question. Or questions. And first, I just want to say that we're living through something that is just inherently stressful and hard for so many different reasons across so many different communities. And so those feelings of stress and hardship and the stressors that you're experiencing are incredibly real. And so one of the first things that I always go to is thinking about what are coping mechanisms and things that actually feel meaningful to you personally in terms of how to cope with stress. Many of us are tuned into, to some degree, like practices, whether they're daily or weekly practices that help us navigate stressful situations. So please turn inward and look for that within yourselves. In terms of other resources, there's a lot of other resources to help folks cope with stress and to navigate it. So MDH, the Department of Health, has some resources and tips that can help anybody, including youth and families. We have some specific ones. And like, as well as like strategies of how to practice some of them. And we'll send out some links to the websites where those are at for you all to take a look at if that feels like something that would be useful and important to you. There's also a lot of free and low cost apps and opportunities online as well. So in terms of navigating mental health, specifically for teens and youth, there's an app that's by and for youth that's specifically for teens. there's a webpage and app called Psychology First Aid, and they have a teen and youth version, and it has all sorts of information. If you're looking specifically for information, that can feel really helpful sometimes. And then there's a ton of other experiential type apps as well, like Find Your Happy Place, that includes tips about finding well-being during COVID-19, and other mindfulness and meditation apps like the Calm app and Headspace apps, and mental health, like various other mental health apps that can actually support practice of mental health or of like self-care and mental health things like meditation or breathing or various other pieces like that. I feel like something that is so important that all of us have been talking to is that connection that we feel like is missing in our lives. And so there's also opportunity to connect online with folks. So there's a space called Wellness in the Woods that's hosting virtual peer support groups every day. NAMI Minnesota, and NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, hosts a variety of like courses and support groups as well. And they have a specific youth resources page. And then there's a number of other online resources and gatherings as well. And something else related to that that I will mention is that in each community, the communities that you live in and go to school in, there's likely community specific resources and online opportunities to gather as well, whether it's through your faith-based communities, through community centers or schools, whether it's like through like your gender and sexuality alliances or various other cultural spaces. Those are also really great places to just find connection with other people that you probably already know and have connection with. Other potential ways to stay connected are staying connected with your school communities, and finding safe ways to connect with peers, whether that's by phone or through some sort of online group gathering. We have, in terms of crisis support and tools to avoid crisis, there's a lot of resources around that as well. And we will share some of those out with you, but the Department of Human Services has a mental health page, and there's crisis lines for youth, young people, and adults on those page. And then there's just so many other like prevention, lifeline type services that you can access as well if you just need somebody to talk to if you feel like you're in a moment of crisis. Examples of those are the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the State Mobile Crisis Services, the Trevor line for LGBTQ youth. There's also a specific line for trans youth called Trans Lifeline. There's a specific place for Native youth called We Are Native, and it's a chat space. And there are actually a lot more chat-based crisis intervention, but also just like therapeutic spaces. So we can include some of those as well if you're looking for more of a, I'm using my fingers, which is silly because you can't see them, but a text-based mental health services as well. So those are just a few of the many, many that there are, and we will make sure that those links are accessible to you all.
Yeah, and this is Erin, I'd love to just add and say that there is I think Shore mentioned this, but a specific mental health page on the COVID page. And you can text MN as in Minnesota to 741-741 24 hours a day if you're in mental health crisis. So I just want to emphasize, and I think as we've engaged across state agencies, mental health providers and resources, folks are open, they want to help. There's a lot of sort of volunteer networks that have been set up. And so reach out if you need support.
And I don't, if it's okay, I'd like to also jump in here. And honestly, as educators, we are all worried. And I think as people who are working on behalf of students and of children, we are very worried about your academics, but the thing that we are most worried about is your mental health. and in making sure that you are okay and that you have what you need. Just because you are not in a school building and because you are not in front of your teachers does not mean that you cannot reach out to them, that you can reach out to your counselors, your social workers, your school psychologist, your principal, your superintendent, members of your school board, a custodial staff person, a lunch person, any person that you have connected with that is in that facility or in that building, they still care about you. Walking out the door doesn't change that. And so know that that is one of the things that actually has kept people up at night about the decision to move toward distance learning. While academics is incredibly important and we really want to make sure that you are learning and prepping for whatever is about to come next in your lives, what we really, really are most focused on and thinking about is your safety and well-being, and making sure that you have what you need, both physically for your health as well as mentally for your health. And so please know that you still have adults who care very, very much about you and really want to do what's best for you. And so please make sure that you reach out. They are ready and willing to help you at any moment in time. And I can tell you that after being an educator for 25 years, the students that I taught in my very first year are still my students. I read about them in the newspaper. I think about them and I see their marriage announcements. I sometimes see their death announcements. I work with them, but they are always my students. And so you are always your teacher students. And so just be aware of that.
Another thing that a lot of us are thinking about right now is getting back into what we thought was normal. Given the uncertainty surrounding the trajectory of the virus, what measures is Minnesota taking to ensure an efficient and safe acclimation of people back into society following the end of the state lockdown?
Hi, everybody. This is Shore again. It's a really great question. It's a really big question, and it's a really hard to answer question. So there's a few things that are currently shifting and changing that I'll mention briefly and then see if you have questions about. One of the big things that really shifted is on April 22nd, Governor Walz and the University of Minnesota and the Mayo Clinic released a new statewide testing plan. And so really the hopes of that is to get as many symptomatic people tested so that those people can then go home and stay home and take care of themselves, but also not spread the COVID-19, the coronavirus, to the people around them and into their communities. So testing allows us to understand how the breadth and how big the spread of this virus really is. And it also helps us understand then who else might be at a high risk of contracting it based on who is already infected. So testing is an incredible tool. And that process of figuring out then who else is at high risk is something that we call contact tracing. So if you've heard words like case and contact tracing in the media, that's what that is. It's when we get a positive test result, we call folks and we say, hey, you have a positive test result. And we just need to ask you some questions about A, how you're feeling, what symptoms you've noticed so that we can better understand all of that. And B, who have you been in really close contact with? Because those people need to know that they have likely been exposed to COVID-19. And so that process of calling confirmed positive cases and then also calling high risk contacts of those cases or of those people is also then helps us understand how big and how broad the reach of COVID-19 is, so that we can start containing it and keep containing it. So the testing is really important. There is a new testing website that if you haven't seen it, it's on the governor's page. So that same website, mn.gov-COVID-19. If you go there, there's a tab that says, if you are sick. And if you hover over that, they'll see there's a testing link. And you can click on that. And one of them is where to get tested. And there's a picture of the state of Minnesota that with a bunch of dots on it. And if you scroll beyond that, you'll see that you can filter a list of clinics by city or by county, and it'll tell you what time they're open, what days they're open, what number to call, how to get an appointment to get tested, if they have drive up and if you can drive up, and then what types of patients they're accepting for testing. So now there's a ton more clinics and spaces that are accepting people who are symptomatic and folks who are also asymptomatic but have been in contact with somebody who's tested positive. And there's still some clinics that are only accepting really high risk folks like healthcare workers and people in congregate living in group home facilities, for example. So that's a great resource to find out where to get tested in your specific city or community. And I can't recommend looking at it's a great place to look at for that type of information. Just this week, Governor Walz also announced that he is going to let the stay-at-home order expire this Sunday, May 18th, as it was written. And so what that means is that all of a sudden the stay-at-home order is gone, and now we're putting in place a new piece called Safer at Home. And really, like, what that is all about is that if folks are able to stay home, so distance learning we know will continue, but for example, if your families are able to continue working from home, that's still recommended. It's still recommended to wear masks out in public if you're getting groceries or going to get some sort of items that is important for your family, as well as when you're just, if you're like taking a walk or going for a hike or something like that, continuing to wear your masks. And as a part of that, some businesses will be reopening. And so somebody had mentioned the dials. And so we are slowly turning those dials, and this is a part of it. Reopening some businesses, as well as starting to really test, like, what is it like to start slowly adding back in some of the pieces of the social fabric of our lives, and seeing how that impacts how the virus spreads. So it'll be a continuous process of testing, where are we at, what's happening when we add this thing back in, and then reevaluating it. And so that's going to be a part of the next few months for all of us, and as well as for Governor Walz and all of the team of people making decisions about this.
Yeah, and I just add, for those of you involved in youth programming, Heather and I are working with a work group and working closely with the Department of Health on a specific guidance that was for summer school and youth programming and how to stay safe in those environments as they're available over the summer. So as Shore sort of said, 6 feet apart, masks, expectations around cleaning and all of that. And so some of you might even work in programming settings where you're a worker for a youth program. And so that guidance is on MDH's website. And just as Shore said, it's a pivot from stay home to stay safe, and a reopening of some businesses at a limited capacity following very strict guidance. And I think executive order the governor signed kind of had an even stronger language about ensuring that public health guidance is followed in these new settings in a variety of places. Yes. So it isn't a reopening and everybody should go about business. As you know, it's a very clear sort of, how do we start to think about what our lives are going to look like for a longer period of time, and how do we really stay safe. But again, as Shore said, just to emphasize, anyone with an underlying condition that's over the age of 65 should continue to stay home, and the executive order had a continued stay at home for those folks even after the other executive order expires at midnight on Sunday, I think it is.
Awesome. Thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate your knowledge and your insight. Just so we can, keep this short, and I do want to be mindful of people's time. We're going to jump to our quick closing share out. So what we want to do is just give each person here on our panel just the opportunity to share a closing thought. Just keep it short and we will move on from there. So I will start with just a quick reflection, and then I'll call out people's names just to quickly be able to go through and just share a closing thought. So just as I start out, I guess I will just say to anyone who's watching this, I guess live, or anyone who watches this in the future, I think it's super important that even though this seems like an endless situation that we're going through, just to remember the importance and the significance of being able to reach out to one another and making sure we're checking in on each other. I know that was something that was super big at the beginning of the pandemic, but just continuing to continue to reach out to friends and family is important. And so now I will pass it on to Erin.
Thanks, Hafsa. I was anticipating a question on the unemployment related to youth. And so I just want to touch on that quickly. We've heard from youth and from the Youth Council specifically that facing barriers to accessing unemployment insurance, and know that that's a concern for families and financial stability. As some of you might know, our state law already had provisions around preventing youth who are attending full-time secondary school from accessing UI. And the governor and lieutenant governor are supporting the legislative language to make this population, who might be some of you or siblings or friends, this population temporarily eligible for UI. And the way the legislation is currently written, it would be retroactive to March 16th, 2020. So I just want to make sure that's clear, because some of you have been lobbying us and writing letters and emails, which I think is great. Use your youth voices, and the governor and lieutenant governor heard you, and thank you so much for that. Sorry, I'm not following the rules exactly right here, but and that would make them young people eligible through the end of 2020. Just to be clear, I got one more text update on that literally as I was getting ready to have my reflection. So I think one of the things that I've just reflected on is the amount of grace that we all are giving each other, colleagues, young people thinking reach out. I think one of the things working in government is there's a certain sense of formality sometimes with how you engage externally, or what kind of information you share, or how you share it. And one of the things that I've just really loved is, as some of that has had to break down in new ways in an emergency response, and we're all working together to stick together, that we've also given each other grace and confidence and partnership and all of that. And I'm really grateful. And that certainly has extended to the Children's Cabinet Advisory Council and to the Minnesota Youth Council and to a lot of young people that we work with. And I just want to thank you all for that.
Thanks, Erin. I think that was important that you addressed the unemployment. Claire, do you want to go next?
Yes, of course. So I just really, from all of this, I just really took that educators are really helping us and supporting us in so many different ways that we don't even see. From the perspective of students, a lot of times it just kind of feels like, oh, we're in our homes and it's hard to see what other people are doing to help us. But this just kind of showed me that there's a lot going on behind the scenes to support us.
Thanks, Claire. Weston?
One thing that I mostly took away is that for students of all ages, whether it be kindergarten to a senior in high school, even if they can't, if they don't understand what's going on in the larger world, they feel the emotions of what's going on in the household, and that's affecting them. So just make sure to ensure that what the students are feeling and what the young people are feeling, and support them, make sure they know that what they're feeling is valid.
Thanks, Weston. Heather?
Thank you. First, I just want to thank you for inviting me to come in and do this panel. I really appreciate having the opportunity. Student voices, especially at this point in time, they've always been incredibly important, but what you have to say now really is going to drive not only the decisions we make, but all the decisions we're going to make in the future. And I just want to thank you for, I think that Erin said, your grace and understanding that there are times when the decisions that we make are not the easy decision, but they are the right decisions. And to have an entire generation of of youth who are going to grow up understanding that and working toward that is incredibly powerful. And so I appreciate your willingness to step up and lead, each of you in the Minnesota Youth Council. And I appreciate your willingness to support your teachers and support your educators and to support your siblings and your families as you're walking through this together. But know that, again, you're never on this alone, that once you are our students, you are always our students. So thank you.
Audrey?
I just wanted to say to everyone watching and all the people here that this is a really important time to remember to keep your mental health in focus. Make sure we're all practicing smart behavior when it comes to working hard and basically anything you do. It's a stressful time. Make sure you aren't piling too much work on yourself and make sure you're keeping your mental health in mind every day.
Thank you. Haley?
Yeah, I just think this was a really beneficial event. I think it's really important that Minnesota state officials stay transparent, especially with students who are being so impacted by the decisions that are being made. And just, yeah, I think it's important that if you're a student that you know that your voice is valuable, so reach out and utilize these resources if you need them. And yeah, that's what I have to say.
Liv?
I just want everyone to, understand that this is not a normal time and you shouldn't expect yourself to be, doing what's normal, having normal sleep schedule, normal productivity or anything, and just, treating yourself with a lot of compassion right now.
Awesome. And then Shore?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just walking away feeling really grateful for your leadership and the example that you're setting to your friends and other students and other people in the state of Minnesota. And I hope that you continue to talk to your peers about how important it is to make the hard choice sometimes of social distancing or wearing a mask or, doing things that feel really hard, especially when it's nice outside and you want to see your people who you love and care about in a time of great transition. So I appreciate all the work you all are doing to be leaders and to be a part of this.
Thank you. So now we're going to close out with Jawaria. If you want to just keep it quick and close us out, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to say that I really appreciated the conversation happening today. And I think it's really easy for us to feel alone and not understand what's happening, but this kind of just reminds us that we aren't alone and that so much is happening behind the scenes. But yeah, thank you to everyone for this. I really appreciated it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jawaria. I wanted to thank everyone, both panelists and audience, for being here today. One thing we do want to end with is saying that if any student who's watching this is interested in being a part of the Minnesota Youth Council next year, our applications are open until June 8th. They were extended. So visit our website, mnyouth.net/myc for if you want to access the application and kind of work with some of the topics that we've been working with throughout the year. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today. We appreciate your time and we hope to work again with you all soon. So have a great weekend.